Hello, everyone. My name is Luke Ambrosetti. I am a guest host today for Data Beats. Uh, Today we have Chris Hexton, founder and CEO of Vero. Chris, it's so great to have you today. What do you have to chat with us about today?
Great to see you again, Luke. Thanks for having me, both to you and Arpit. Super excited to talk about what we're doing here at Vero. We build marketing automation software, and late last year we launched a version of our application that is warehouse native, which we'll get into. Super excited about this space and keen to share some of the learnings and thoughts we have around it.
For those who aren't familiar with it, how would you define a warehouse native app, or what Snowflake calls a connected app?
I would define it as a software application that does not have its own data backend. Instead of syncing and then storing a copy of our customers' data, Vero connects directly to our customers' data warehouse and uses that as the data backend. So, the idea is all data read and write essentially is from and back to the customer's data backend.
So, for users of warehouse native apps, they don't need to sync or store that customer data, right? Which eliminates kind of that data integration work. But does that come with a caveat, right? Are there any limitations to that type of app or deployment?
Yeah, I think you've hit the nail on the head in terms of what we're super excited about, which is that this can really reduce the costs of getting your data into your marketing tool, your email marketing tool. And the idea there is, both you don't have hard costs because the data is not being stored twice; it just stays in one place, which is your data warehouse as the customer. And then you also remove some of those resourcing costs, setting up new data pipelines or new libraries to sync and manage this two-way sync problem. I think the caveat, if there is one, is like it's still not zero work. You obviously need to have a data warehouse, and there needs to be data in there that you can leverage to create your audiences. Personalize your emails, send your email marketing. So you do have to, have a data warehouse, have some data in there. So it's not zero work. That's the caveat. But as I said, we're super excited because I think the tooling that's building around the data warehouse generally, is making it, I think, a lot less of a lift to get that data in a usable format than the traditional ways you'd integrate with a MarTech tool.
Yeah, so let's talk about some of that work actually. What are some of those specific steps that you need in the data warehouse or in that data platform for your warehouse native app to work?
I think about it as you've got the data warehouse as that base layer. That's obviously where the data's going to live. So first thing you need is a data warehouse, of course, but that's super easy. Snowflake, for example, free account, away you go. I think the two main steps then are data collection. So you've actually got to get the data into your warehouse, and that data is generally either going to come from on-site, like telemetry, so something like Snowplow Analytics or Rudderstack or Segment.com, and then the other source of data is like a Fivetran or coming from other SaaS apps. Like you might pull data from Stripe and put that in your warehouse. So data collection is kind of the first thing you need. And then the second thing is making sense of that data, joining it together, stitching it. And for an email marketing use case, you're generally thinking about building audiences in terms of users or customers. So that stitching is around, okay, taking these disparate data sources and then turning them into sort of one row per user or one record per user, so that when you build an audience, you've got all the data handy. So that second step of cleaning, organizing the data is the second critical step. And for that we use DBT. That's what we're seeing most of our customers use as well. And I think those are really the two things. From there you just plug the tool in. In our case, you can then build your audiences, send your newsletters, away you go.
Yeah, no, great. Yeah, that makes perfect sense. So, a lot of those traditional email, tools, email marketing tools, offer kind of a more visual segmentation, right, layer on top of, on top of that underlying data store of that data integration that we talked about. So it's actually much easier for, more non-technical, non-data folks to iterate and build their workflows quickly, right? Can warehouse native tools also offer that? I mean, first of all, do they today? And in what way can they do that?
Yeah, absolutely. Great question. Obviously, one of the key selling points of any marketing automation, customer engagement platform like Vero is that you're trying to enable the people, the marketers. It's their job. They're trying to engage the customers, give them tools to do that as efficiently as possible, as well as powerfully as possible. And a big part of that is not all marketers are super familiar with SQL. definitely not going to be familiar with the raw data floating around in the data warehouse. So, at the moment, with Vero, certainly we've launched with a very, you want to call it raw interface, where you do have to use SQL to build your audiences, but we're getting very close to releasing a more visual editor. And I'm really confident that, in the very near future, it'll be an experience that's super easy, super familiar for a marketer, that's very reminiscent of the more traditional SaaS tools. I think the two roads it can go down, one is we could ask our customers, data engineers, to set up certain tables, certain views in the data warehouse where, once, if it looks like a certain thing that we're expecting, we can then build a traditional visual sort of drag and drop condition builder right on top. The other way it can go is, having the data engineers build some segments, some SQL queries that might have variables that a less technical user can then select and play around with at a high level without ever really seeing that underlying SQL, that query to the data warehouse. So they're the kind of two main schools of thoughts I've seen, and I think both, bring it up to a level where it's super approachable for a less technical person, but you're still getting that benefit of querying the data in real time. So super optimistic about where this will go.
Yeah, I mean, like you're saying, I agree exactly right with those two approaches. There's still some technical work, integration work that's done there, but you don't have
Absolutely.
to kind of fiddle with APIs. You can do all of that transformation work within the data warehouse, right? That you're probably already doing transformation work anyways. Whichever path you go, right? Whether you specify those schemas, or whether that data engineer, the analytics engineer is coming through and building those to fit into your product.
Yeah, and I've definitely seen you talking on LinkedIn, Luke, about, there's with those traditional tools, like there's always this promise of it being super no code, low code, but you still need the data in there, and that's often where things get stuck, right? Like maybe the
Right.
data you actually need as a marketer never even makes it because there's not the support from the rest of the org. So I think, one of the, even in the early days with the less than user friendly interface that we've launched with, we still had customers, marketers who are super pumped because they have real confidence in the underlying data in a way they didn't before. And that trade off's been super worth it. So yeah,
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, let's talk more about Vero, right? Vero actually it's more it's two products. You have the more traditional email marketing tool, Vero Cloud, and then you also now have the warehouse native component, Vero Connect. What are the pros of each different tool? Because they operate kind of quite a bit differently, like as we've talked about.
absolutely.
And who and when should each tool be used with?
Yeah. I mean, so we've been around for a while, and Vero Cloud has been our core product. And we launched Vero Connect about 12 months ago. We're super excited about this innovation. Over the last few years, the power of data warehouses has just, grown so much, as has their adoption. So, um, these days when we talk to customers, really trying to understand what their needs are. And I think the key thing you need to use the warehouse native version of Vero Connect, is a data warehouse with some data in it. So if you don't have that, then perhaps Vero Cloud's a better fit. But, one thing we're seeing is if you're a relatively small or new organization, you're maybe graduating from something like MailChimp, then Vero Cloud could be a great fit, because in essence, what's happening is we're spinning up a data warehouse for you behind the scenes that's managed, and then giving you some tools to get simple data in there, like forms to capture blog subscribers or whatnot. So it can be a great way to start with this holistic CRM 360-degree view of the customer, and then as you get more mature, graduate up to that connected way of doing things. That's at least where we're at now, but it's going to be super interesting to see what happens over the next few years, and are more and more companies spinning up Snowflake from the word go. But that's how things are sitting at the moment.
Absolutely. So, yeah, with those two different products, right? Do you today have customers using both products, or is it more one or the other? And then, if they had, you know, that more traditional version of the app, why would they maybe want to pursue, uh, you know, uh, why would they maybe want to pursue the other version, or the Vero Connect?
We've definitely got a couple of customers using both. And so, building on my answer before, the other thing we're seeing is there are different use cases for email marketing in organizations. So, the killer use case for the warehouse native version that we're seeing at the moment is what I would call product marketing. And so, that's anything that happens after a user signs up for your app. So, that could both be, product updates, company announcements, could be more automated messages, trying to get customers to become active again, all that sort of, stuff that's educating the customer base about the product. That fits really nicely with the warehouse native version, because a lot of people have a lot of rich data about their users in their data warehouse. So it's a perfect fit. Another use case for email marketing is further up the top of the funnel. So, it might be that blog subscription use case we talked about. In a lot of cases, we're seeing customers don't have the maturity in terms of the data in their data warehouse for that top of funnel, sort of email marketing. And so that's another axis on which people might decide to use the traditional SaaS model versus the new warehouse native model for the different sorts of email marketing they're doing. Why might someone move from one to the other? Yeah, I think often particularly as a company scales, they've got more data. So that can be one thing, both in terms of more data to wrangle. So all of a sudden, you're trying to keep millions of rows in sync across several different tools. That can be very costly in terms of time. You can then have a lot of fear that the data is not actually in sync, as well as actual cost. One of the exciting things about Vero is we have a different cost model. We can talk more about that. But cost could be a driver if you're at that scale. And then I think over time, as the org matures and you hire your first data engineer or someone puts that hat on, you've got the more sophisticated data warehouse. You're actually organizing the data. At some point, that becomes something you trust more than the version of the data you have in your different point solutions, such as Vero Cloud. And that would be a great time to move to the warehouse native way of doing things. Yeah.
And it's the email marketing, email engagement, just such a wide category, right? For all these different tools that teams use. Which use cases are not kind of fulfilled by that warehouse native solution today?
Yeah, I'd probably answer this by saying that, as I said before, the best use case, or the most popular use case so far for the warehouse native version has been that product marketing use case, and I think it's just because that's the use case where people have the most organized data. But yeah, I think some areas where a warehouse native app might is not a good fit now, may never be. Another example would be transactional email. So we're really honed in on either your batch sends, which like a product update is to a batch of people, or lifecycle messages, which are still marketing. So hey, users have signed up but they haven't used something. I think those fit really well with the warehouse way of doing things. But if you have to have a message that's sent milliseconds after someone requests a password or something, not a great fit for the warehouse native version of our product, because generally, people are rebuilding the models, the views in their warehouse on some periodic basis that's not going to be milliseconds. So that'd be a great example to answer your question of somewhere where a warehouse native app is not a great fit at the moment, and may never be. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. I think those more event triggered workflows. The ones you need really APIs
Yeah.
for that quick send.
Help bridge the gap between data people and non data people. Join us on databeats.community.